California's water supply system was designed to really take advantage of our natural hydrology. California is one of only 6 places in the world that captures rain and snow and utilizes that to build an economy. But that system was only designed for 2 types of water use a century ago. And that was municipal and industrial, or what we call M&I, and agricultural. And we actually haven't had any major updates to that system since about the 70s. We had about 25 million people at the time. And now, since about the 70s to today, we've introduced a 3rd water user, and our population is nearing 50 million people. And so that 3rd water user, this 3rd straw that was introduced in the 70s, but actually more so in the 90s, early 90s, is environmental protection programs. Now, these are government-mandated programs by which to protect the environment, whether it may be species protection or habitat conservation, water quality issues. And slowly over time, the 3rd water user is now the largest water user. According to the Department of Water Resources for the state of California, 50% of the water developed water being water captured and stored in these systems, is required to go to environmental protection programs. So that 3rd water user actually is under no contractual obligation to pay into the system in order to maintain that infrastructure or to pay for the movement of that water. And this really speaks to the accountability of the system, but let's review. We have a system designed for 2 types of water use that now is providing for a 3rd type of water use and for a population half the size of what we are, and we haven't upgraded the system in operation or in physical infrastructure to meet our 21st century priorities, our 21st century demand, and more importantly, our 22nd century demand and priority. California became the 6th largest global economy in less than 100 years because of this water system.
Production funding for this program has been provided by the Myers Farms Family Trust, bringing awareness to the consumer of the responsible agricultural practices performed by farmers in the fertile fields of the San Joaquin Valley, preserving the world's food supply and natural habitats for the generations yet to come. We are proud to support quality educational programs like Tapped Out and Valley's Gold, only available on Valley PBS.
The winter of 2017 proved once again the extreme contrasts of California's climate. With reservoirs at record low levels, tens of thousands of acres of valley farmland left fallow, and front yard lawns turning brown across the state, the skies opened up and brought a 5-year drought to an end. In fact, 2017 became one of the wettest years in California's recorded history. Until Governor Brown's declaration that the drought was officially over in most of the state, California was in a flood emergency and a drought emergency at the same time. The main source of drinking water for most of Southern California, Lake Oroville in Northern California, the cornerstone of the state's water project, saw its spillway system collapse with the record flows nearly ending in a catastrophic failure. Every major dam on the Sierra Nevada mountain's western slope operated at flood release to make room for the millions of acre-feet of water still coming down from above. And yet, in a state that has seen severe drought many times before, and will no doubt see it again, there was no plan or system in place to capture the excess water and store it for the next drought that is certain to come. California put a new law on the books in 2014 to better control groundwater in the Central Valley. but had no plan in place to recharge these desperately overdrafted aquifers in the event that a record year of precipitation might happen. But while the state government in Sacramento may not be doing everything it can to utilize and expand the overstressed water infrastructure in California, people on the ground at the local levels across the Central Valley are trying to work ahead of the problems. To better appreciate these efforts, it's important to understand a critical step in water delivery in California. Once water is captured behind a dam or pumped up from the ground, it's the job of water districts to deliver that water to cities and farms. And in the case of the Fresno Irrigation District, that also means getting creative with how to get more water than the state and federal projects can yield.
I think what's important for folks to understand, especially in this area, is that when you look at the watersheds comparably with the Friend system and the Kings River system, they're almost identical. They mirror each other pretty much in snowpack. As we receive snowpack, they run off almost identically. The water supply that's developed yearly from those two reservoirs nearly mirror each other. The problem is that Friend is only a 500,000 acre-foot reservoir, and Pine Flat is a 1 million acre-foot reservoir. So there's a benefit to those folks off the Kings River to be able to capture that water, hold it longer, and be able to deliver that to our growers. Unfortunately, that's not the same for Friend. Friend is half the size. It's a 500,000 acre-foot reservoir. It's got a dead pool, and so there really isn't 500,000 to be able to capture water and store it, and to be able to deliver and make it available to other entities or irrigation districts, such as the Fresno Irrigation District. FID and the City of Fresno have a Class 1 and a Class 2 water supply. The City of Fresno has a 60,000 acre-foot Class 1 water supply, and FID has a 75,000 acre-foot Class 2 water supply that is really unique to the Friend system.
Class 1 water is the first 800,000 acre-feet of water that comes down the San Joaquin River each year. It's the first tier of water that FID and the City of Fresno can capture. 1 acre-foot of water is about 326,000 gallons, and the typical Class 1 water price paid is around $100 per acre-foot. In January of 2017, with millions of acre-feet of water being released from the bottom of Friant Dam to make room in a lake too small for the watershed above it, the City of Fresno cut a deal with the Bureau of Reclamation to buy surplus water at $10 an acre-foot, getting it to groundwater recharge basins like Leaky Acres near the Fresno Yosemite International Airport to bank it for not-so-rainy days sure to come.
We work with the Bureau of Reclamation at Friend. The Bureau of Reclamation makes a declaration. We take water from Friend. And the way it physically gets to the district is that it comes down the Friend-Kern Canal. Each one of us is a contractor, and those contractors have the ability to access the water from the Friend-Kern Canal, or from the San Joaquin via the Friend-Kern Canal. We have turnouts, 3 different turnouts, that we take that water into our district. So we balance the water from the Friend-Kern, and we balance the water from the Kings, and we look at storage in each one of those, and we begin to bring that water in, and we deliver it to either our cities for their surface water treatment plants, to our growers, or we begin to bank that water as well too. We recharge in those facilities that we have.
We're at a point, it seems like that was the spirit of the American spirit back then. It was like a can-do society. We went to the moon in the 60s, thinking about going to the moon. It's almost it seems impossible today,
right.
but we had this thing like, we got a problem, we can figure out a solution for it. And for me, there's a lot of things that I think that we could do that could benefit all of us, was as far as water use. And because we're lucky enough in this area here in the exchange contractors area, we have been blessed and fortunate that we've had a good supply of water. That is in jeopardy now, but it's also proof that surface water, if you look around, there's not as many orchards at almonds in this area there is in other areas. We have high groundwater here. It's anywhere between 6-12 feet, some places 3 feet, and a lot of that is because of the surface irrigation that we've had maintained over long periods of time. The idea, people need to understand this. In the San Joaquin Valley, we would flood a lot because we're flat. It's basically flat, and so you take water that would flood farm ground and you hold it back and return that same water back to the same fields, but this time we're growing food with it. Instead of it all coming down the mountain in a 1 to 2 month period and leaving things inundated with water, we're gonna meter it out over the summer and grow food with it.
We haven't updated our water infrastructure system since, if you want to fudge it, the early 70s. We had 25 million people at the time. We only had to service 2 types of water use at the time, again, municipal and industrial and agricultural. And since then, our population has almost doubled. We're nearing 50 million people in the next 10 to 15 years. Our relationship to the water has changed. The technology we have, the way we use it, and more importantly, our priorities have changed. There's been a value shift on how that water is used when we introduced a third water user in the 90s, which is these environmental protection programs mandated by government. So infrastructure, we have two types of contributing factors to the water crisis of California. We have a lack of investment in infrastructure, both from a maintenance standpoint, as we've seen most on display in 2017 with the massive amount of water that's just eroding our infrastructure underneath us. But also we have a lack of investment in our regulatory processes, the rules by which we operate this infrastructure as well. So on the physical side of it, the reality of it is there is not enough in the developed system under our current rules especially to meet all of the goals we're trying to meet. And that's where we end up in this us versus them, this either or scenario, and you end up with some really distressing cases where there's just taking of property and the detrimental effect that's having throughout the ripple effect. And again, I think we're putting industries and communities at odds with each other that really shouldn't be, but they are, because that's the way when a third entity comes in and has their hand on the spigot and can control whether or not you made a deal to buy that water from a willing seller and you're the willing buyer, or whether or not there was a contractual obligation, but you have a third invisible hand there turning that spigot at their discretion. That causes conflict.
In 1970, when the Endangered Species Act was enacted, I don't really think anybody in the valley thought that there was going to be a huge effect. In fact, there was probably a good deal of applause for the law because there were a lot of species that really were in danger around the country, well-known species. I don't think anybody ever thought that little tiny species would be designated and that they would be treated perhaps the same way, and they would have the impact that many times their size. And that certainly is the case that has happened with, that made many species such as the Delta smelt, a little tiny fish that's 3 inches long. It made it a household name in the San Joaquin Valley, along with the Chinook salmon that were designated, various runs of Chinook salmon in the Sacramento River that got endangered species designation. These had a tremendous impact on the valley. And the way they did was that federal water agencies began really regulating the amount of water that could be pumped out of the Delta through the pumping plants near Tracy into the California Aqueduct and the Delta Mendota Canal. These were biological opinions that governed the operation of these plants, very tightly written, and ultimately, in drier years, around 2007, 2008, they started drying up the water supplies on the west side almost altogether. And finally, there were some zero water supply years during the 5-year drought that concluded in 2017. This was just almost beyond comprehension to people in the San Joaquin Valley who had been signed contracts and had believed that they would always be able to receive and count on a supply of water, and had invested in equipment, invested in farms, invested in buildings, invested in life, based on the promise that there was always going to be Central Valley Project water there. The same was true for the state project users further down the valley. And so the lines of conflict were really drawn, and they haven't gone away. Even in 2017, a big water year with water literally falling out of reservoirs, going over the top and eating up spillways, as has occurred up at Oroville. The Central Valley Project declaration, the initial declaration, was only 60%. And that's, it tells most users, I think, it's impossible to ever have a full supply of water for which they contracted in good faith years and years earlier, and for which the system was designed.
What you saw in the late 80s was one of the worst droughts in California's history at the time. Ultimately, the recent drought has shown that things do get worse. But in 1988 to 1992 was a really severe drought. And we saw the first listing of winter run Chinook salmon as endangered because the Bureau of Reclamation lost temperature control and virtually wiped out the species below Shasta Dam. And so we started to see salmons be listed under the Endangered Species Act during that drought. And that culminated in a movement for the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, where Congress mandated that we needed to manage these projects not just for flood control and irrigation and human use, but to balance those effects and to make protection of the environment and restoration of salmon a co-equal project purpose. And it really was the recognition that over the last century, even before the Central Valley Project, we were radically transforming our rivers and driving our native species extinct. And we were wiping out our native salmon that thousands of fishing jobs depend on. And so in 1992, Congress ultimately passed and President Bush signed into law the Central Valley Project Improvement Act.
What is ironic about the whole thing since 1992 is that the fish populations of both smelt and the salmon have not increased. And so it's kind of like the definition of insanity. You keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. And here we are, some 25 years later, and the result of trying to enhance the fish has not changed, but the economic development and lack thereof in the Central Valley, we are now in devastation mode, and we are seeing our farmers, ranchers, our communities that are underprivileged going by the wayside. We have 40 to 50% unemployment in some of our communities that are primarily of minorities, that has really taken the brunt of all this. And unless something changes, it is just going to get worse.
For the last 30 years, agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley has collectively felt like the deck is getting more stacked against them. In times of drought, the focus on water use obviously becomes intense. We look with a deeper interest at who is using the most water and how they are using it. From an agricultural perspective, this is true, except for the fact that the largest user of water now in the state, environmental protection programs, isn't part of that same scrutiny. For instance, when Governor Brown declared a drought emergency in 2014 and mandated a statewide reduction in urban water use by 25% and cut water deliveries to farmers for growing food, the water allocated to the environment had no reductions placed on it. In fact, at the same time Californians were having to conserve water, environmental advocates were asking for and getting more water to improve fish and wildlife habitat. This apparent inequity and bias against agriculture by the state government was amplified in 2012 when Governor Brown appointed Felicia Marcus to the State Water Resources Control Board. This board of unelected officials controls California's water rights, water quality, and infrastructure funding. Prior to being chosen to lead the State Water Resources Control Board, Felicia Marcus was the Western Director of the Natural Resources Defense Council, one of the most active and effective environmental advocacy organizations in America.
And so what I see is they are wanting to have more unimpaired water flows, unrestricted flows in our rivers to flow out to the ocean. Talking to Felicia Marcus, chairman of the board of the State Water Resources Control Board, her agenda is to have more flows and higher flows, and she feels that that will be a solution to create and make up for everything that is wrong in the Delta. I disagree with her because we have not seen any improvement in the species over the last 25 years. And so I think going down this path is not working.
My name's Graham Burt Papatone, and I'm a third-generation San Joaquin Valley farmer. Today I'm checking out my 2017 wheat harvest. I'm checking for moisture, which is being harvested, processed, going into silage to feed the cow, who makes the milk, who makes the cheese and the butter that you eat 3 times a day.
For me as a third-generation producer, my hope is to keep our farm going for at least another generation, which is very difficult to do, to appeal to young people to come into this industry with so many question marks about the things that we need to sustain it, most notably water. Really, the kids that we need to come into this industry will have a different lens that they see things through. They'll be innovators. They will change the things that have been going on for the last 40, 50 years that are still the same today. They'll be able to come in with a whole different mindset, technology, innovation. They will do these things, but it's very difficult to appeal to them and say, we want you to come into this industry. This is a good way of life. You can make a living here. You can do these things. But the big question mark is, can we still do it 10 years from now? Or are they wasting 10 years of their life coming into this industry here and then turn around 10 years from now and have to go find a job doing something else?
I mean, in 31 years of being an ag, I never dreamt of, being older and being portrayed like a criminal. I think that providing food for people to eat 3 times a day is pretty honorable and humbling. We've been having to run pumps a lot more than we're used to. We're having wells go out all throughout the valley. We're having to foul a lot of ground, so that's a decrease in production. It's just something I've never seen before.
I run a small operation. We farm 240 acres. And I probably spend 40% or more of my time going to meetings, filling out paperwork, trying to stay ahead of the curve because this stuff changes sometimes on a daily basis to make sure that we're in compliance. And what happens to the smaller producer as this expands is going to be that they just can't compete anymore. They don't have the economies of scale that some of these larger producers have to be able to absorb these costs and hire people to handle this stuff for them. So what we'll wind up with is probably a considerable consolidation in the industry as a whole, because when we can't do what we're doing on a small scale,
we throw our hands up and sell to the big guys. And that is one of the fears that I have going down the road. Again, when you talk about the next generation coming or young folks coming into the industry, it's going to be more limited.
I think it starts with infrastructure. We haven't had any improvements or development since the 70s, and the population's nearly doubled. And I think we're the easy target.
I would certainly think that the cost of food would go up as the number of producers goes down. It eliminates a lot of competition, and that's just simple economics. So I would assume that over the long haul, yes, that would cause the price of food to go up. My future in farming is in question. There's no doubt about it. If things continue to go the way they're going today, I'm not sure that I can carry my family's business through another generation.
I think I'll be regulated straight out of a job, to be frankly honest.
The first thing to lose its water demand, and there's really three water demands: the environment, agriculture, and municipal industrial. The environment took a huge hit on water in the 1920s to the 1950s when we built dams and canals and infrastructure. You can think of Hetch Hetchy taking water to San Francisco. You can think of the Owens Valley Aqueduct taking water from Owens Valley to Southern California. Then we wind up with the CVP, then the state water projects. All of those things took a huge hit on the environmental water. It took the hit, like I say, in the 20s to the 50s. The next thing that's happening is that agriculture is now taking the hit. Within California water law, it's in the statutes, it says the highest and best use of water is always municipal domestic water. If there is a crunch on water, they get the water. And because of that, if any more water is taken away from ag for environmental uses to recover what might have been taken away, ag can't fight the urbans. The law says they can't. So the only thing ag can fight is environmental water. So because with time we keep using more and more water, the demand goes up as the population grows and wants to eat, we wind up having this fight. It's water or, is it food or fish? Or is it jobs versus fish? So what's happening is the environment is telling you we have a problem. And the problem is all of us want to use all of the water. We don't want to give any water up. And I know in the Fresno area we're using about 15% more water through time than we've been getting from the standpoint of rainfall. That's coming out of our aquifers. We're mining our groundwater.
And it's not an all or nothing. It's not to say that you have to do storage and you don't have to conserve. No, again, we go back to we value the water differently. Our relationship with the water has changed. Unfortunately, it took a 6-year drought for us to do it. But when you start seeing your bills go up for water that you're not receiving, and you're the mother of 3 in Compton, that water becomes valuable to you in a way it never was before. And this is where it has to be about diversifying our water portfolio, to use the cliche. But the reality of it is the way that we would increase our infrastructure on micro levels in your own home, from utilizing just simple soil moisture monitors in your lawn, all the way, using drip irrigation that we use here on the farm, use it in your lawn as well, use it at the home. So you can use it on a micro level, at the industrial level. Water recycling, both at the industrial level, is incredible, the technology we have there. The ability to make our water work more. Again, that relationship has changed. But that does not solve the problem of having water to conserve or recycle in the first place. And that's where our macro infrastructure comes into place in a lot of ways as well. And we go back to the original needs of this system. Protect from flooding. Look at us today in 2017, and we have severe risk of flooding in key regions. We've already had evacuations due to flooding in certain parts of the state. I've been worried about flooding for 2 months, and we're sitting here in May. The amount of water that's about to rush off these mountains when that snow melts. And our infrastructure has not been upgraded to the levels it should be, in 30, 40 years. And that's both a state issue and a federal issue. The federal government, under the current charter for the Bureau of Reclamation is only allowed to look at maintenance. It's not even allowed to explore new water projects.
So when you boil down the water crisis in California, you zero in on a few major points. First, the environmental protections of the Delta. Most of the crops in the state are grown south of the Delta, but the Delta is where most of the fresh water ends up. If you have laws to protect Delta smelt and salmon in place that are out of balance with the needs of agriculture to access that same water, which they have signed government contracts promising them that access, then we should bring balance back to those laws. On the flip side, if you're an environmentalist and you've advocated for increased fresh water flows to the Delta to save the fish, and for 25 years you've been taking more and more water away from farmers to restore a species, and that species continues to decline, at what point do you give the water back to the farmer and try something else? When it comes to agriculture's use of water they have been delivered or have been pumping from the ground, ag needs to continue to adapt and advance its efficiency of water use. The problem of overdrafting groundwater isn't an illusion. Agriculture has overdrafted the groundwater of Central California for almost 100 years. It's like a reoccurring cycle in the valley. Ag will point back to the Delta and say, if you'd free up that surface water there and get it back in the pumps and into our canals, we wouldn't have to pump the groundwater. But that excuse only goes so far. What if the state of California experiences a devastating 7 to 10 year drought? A drought where there isn't enough water in any of our reservoirs, even to protect the fish habitat in the Delta. Then what? Do you pump every drop out of the ground in that case and hope the drought ends before you completely deplete the resource and cause billions in damage with subsidence? Or do you look at a third major issue, building more surface storage? Reasonable thinking should suggest that if you double the amount of people living in the state, but don't build more dams to hold back water when it does fall from the sky, you're gambling with a lot. Environmental protection becomes a tricky term. Do you protect the environment so much that it becomes an environment that humans can't live in?
There are many fish species that live for part or all of their lives in the Delta that are now listed under federal and state endangered species acts. That includes numerous runs of salmon, it includes steelhead trout, it includes sturgeon, and there are some others in there. And if you think about that problem, what it really reflects is that this ecosystem has become pretty unhealthy as a place for these fish to do well. And we've seen, long-term declines in populations of many of these fish. There are a lot of reasons why they're not doing well. Part of it is how we manage the flows. It's not just the quantity of water, but also the timing of water, because we've kind of tamed our natural systems by storing all the water the way we do upstream and then delivering it during times when it's most needed by people for irrigation of crops, but also for use in cities. That has changed the sort of natural pattern and timing of flows. So part of the solution is related to flow management, but what we've also seen is that we've got a lot more chemical pollutants in our water, and that comes both from farming and from urban areas. We've got a lot of invasive species that have kind of gotten more comfortable as this system has transitioned into something different from what it was originally.
One of the really exciting things is that there are examples of solutions that involve agriculture and wildlife and bringing those two together. So The management of the rice fields in the Sacramento Valley is a great example, where those flooded rice fields serve as wetland habitat for a hugely diverse and abundant waterbird community. That's one of the really exciting solutions. There's also exciting programs going on now that provide monetary incentives for farmers to manage their way in such a way that they're growing food, but they're also growing habitat for wildlife in other parts of the year.
In many ways, smelt has become kind of this red herring in the dispute, where it really is kind of the focal point for opponents of environmental protection in a way to avoid talking about the thousands of fishing jobs that depend on healthy salmon runs that benefit from these protections for smelt and endangered salmon, or for the thousands of farmers in the Delta who need water quality to be maintained in the Delta in order for them to farm. When we think about agriculture, all too often we think monolithically about ag as though it were one single large corporate farm. The reality is that agriculture is diverse throughout this state. From Northern California to the Imperial Valley, we have agriculture throughout the state, all of which has very different needs and very different crops and is using very different water supplies. In the Salinas Valley, you've got folks using recycled water to help maintain their saltwater barrier and recharge groundwater. In the Sacramento Valley, you have rice farmers who are use a lot of water, but they also provide habitat for birds and wildlife, and hopefully, we'll be able to better balance those needs with the needs for salmon and other fish in the river. In the San Joaquin Valley, one of the things that often gets overlooked is that we have millions of acres, some of whom have senior water rights, and so they'll get 100% of their water even before a junior water contractor like Westlands gets any. So during the drought, some farmers were getting no water from the Central Valley Project, while others were getting hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water. And it really is the system based on California's longstanding principle of first in time, first in right water rights that is seemingly inequitable. It means that not all farmers are treated the same, and it means that sometimes some folks bear all of those water supply cutbacks while others are getting all of their water that they want.
Yes, this state has a huge amount of environmental water, but you're never going to capture it. But if you look at something like the Delta, you're now dealing with, you're seeing an environment that it says, well, it's in stress, but why is it in stress? And it's in stress because we, the society, the population of California, don't want to give up anything. We want all of this water for swimming pools, washing cars, drinking, taking showers, eating food as much as we want whenever we want it. And can you go on like that forever? And the answer is no.
It's often said that agriculture is not that big part of the California economy. That, some people say it's only 2% of our GDP, so that doesn't make it that important. Well, I don't know whether that's true. I think for the person who eats 3 times a day, and you take away agriculture, it becomes very important very quickly.
Here's something that's considered. This is why I look at some of these statistics and I scratch my head. It is said that the average American spends, close to 27% of their income on their home. Then they spend the other 20% on vehicles and 17% or maybe 13, 15, I don't want to quote me on the numbers, on food. And then they go alcohol and entertainment, and they break it down to these other pieces. But this is how disconnected we are from the reality of agriculture. Your house is made of agriculture. Alcohol is agriculture, and clothing is agriculture. So if you're going to break down people's expenses, okay, and you're going to try to tell the people, oh, well, look, you only spend, agriculture is only 13% of the American budget, but their house is this percentage, and their clothing is this percentage, and their alcohol consumption is this percentage. Your alcohol, clothing, and house is part of agriculture, is it not?
I think as time goes by and we've lost most of our
our rights, our contract water, and we're seeing our neighbors a little further north on the San Joaquin lose more of their water. It's getting diverted to the environment. You move further north, and now in Stanislaus County, you're starting to see guys lose some of their water along those rivers. And the minute that the senior rights holders start feeling a little pressure that they may lose some of their water, I think that will really bring the community of growers together to better tell our story. And remember, as a group, we represent less than 1% of the population. And so you have this diverse group that culturally are kind of independent thinkers, and we're getting our tails kicked.
In times of crisis, our ability to innovate, adapt, and overcome situations is well proven. 5 years of extreme drought activated discussions, mobilized people into action, and forced industries like agriculture to work around problems to keep moving forward. The drought also provided an obvious platform for those in support of building more water storage in California. General public support for the construction of dams like the Temperance Flat project increases as the negative effects of not having enough water storage are amplified in times of increased need. Still, staunch opponents of dam building in the name of environmentalism or economics make the reoccurring argument that building dams in places where rain is scarce doesn't make sense. Why build a $3 billion dam if there isn't any water to fill the lake? But those fighting for water storage expansion have history and climatology on their side. The cycle of drought and then abundant periods of rainfall is exactly how California works. You build dams to capture extra water in years when it does fall, not when it doesn't.
You know, you have a watershed on the San Joaquin that's exactly, it mirrors the Kings River watershed, but we only have half the reservoir, a 500,000 acre-foot reservoir on Millerton. That's why it's important for folks to understand that we need to develop, and we have an opportunity to develop Temperance Flat, to be able to capture more of this water. There's 9,000 CSF leaving the reservoir today. You know, 9,000 CSF over a period of about 30 days is enough water for us to deliver to the city of Fresno all year long. So it is important for us to understand that as the water's leaving, that's opportunity for us to take that water and divert it in a time when it's best needed. And so from FID's perspective, we're going to do what we need to do to try to help the construction of Temperance Flat.
We need desperate updates to our infrastructure, partly because the way we would do it today is not the way we did it 100 years ago. The idea of building new storage, I think everybody wants to cut straight to scorched earth scenario. We're going to dam up every river in the state, and that's not true at all. Right now, because of the way the system has already been developed and functioning, you do just a few strategic increases in capacity, both at existing facilities, but also in building a few new facilities. And you massively increase the flexibility of the existing system, opening up storage potential in existing reservoirs without having to dam up any new river. So small, new technology, small, new investment is far more effective to not only meeting our current goals, which by the way includes environmental. Increasing storage capacity increases the water available for environmental programs should they need it as well. Increasing the capacity in a new and strategic way not only helps us meet our current goals, but also helps us in preparing for the future.
We have these opportunities that come around. They don't come around every year. In fact, I can remember back on the Kings River watershed, which FID receives quite a bit of its water from the Kings, there was a reservoir that was being proposed. It was called Rogers Crossing. And suddenly some of the funding had fallen away. This was 40 years ago. And it was up to the diverters, the members of the Kings River, to come up with the money to build that reservoir. But they thought that $30 an acre foot was going to be too much money to build the reservoir. We would buy $30 an acre foot water all day long today. It was a mistake that, that was seen and we're living with back then. Had it been constructed, they had everything in place to make it happen. They just didn't have the funding to make it happen. I'd hate to see the same thing happen here and then have our children and grandchildren say, why did we not take the opportunity to construct a reservoir when we knew we needed it? We had these state laws. We were a critically overdrafted basin, and we needed to capture that water so that we can stay sustainable. FID is going to do everything we can to keep our farmers farming and our cities vibrant.
Today, we're experiencing something very unique. We have just finished a 5-year drought, but not an ordinary drought. This is a historic drought. This is a drought that resulted in thousands of acres being fallowed, maximum water restrictions to urban users, the creation of laws because of water. We've just gone through that. To now, we're in what is probably one of the wettest seasons in this century. But what we're seeing is that lack of storage has resulted in us losing hundreds of thousands of acre feet to the ocean. And that should send us a strong signal that if we want to be prepared for the future and future drought years, we better figure out how to better utilize our water resources. That's going to be the challenge moving forward. Hopefully Californians don't see this year being as the year that solved the problems because we got extra water. It doesn't work that way. We got to think bigger and broader, just like people before us did when they built these projects.
We're really fortunate in the San Joaquin Valley to have this wonderful climate. We have perfect weather for growing. We have perfect soils for growing. In the early days, all we needed was water, and we got that too. We put the water to work. And we created the most incredible agricultural garden the world has ever known. The most productive place on earth from a farm standpoint. It is beyond belief that there are among our fellow Californians those who would willingly put farming, or at least a large portion of it, out of business and not recognize the value that it has to not only the health of the nation and the welfare of the nation through feeding the nation and the world to some extent, but also because of the safety involved. If we don't grow our food here with the high food safety standards that we have, if we don't have the water to do that, the food's going to have to come from somewhere else. If those crops are from overseas, we're not going to have the same high degree of food safety. We need to be dedicated to developing and providing water supplies, not only for the people who live here, but the people who farm here. Because without water for farming, we're going to be in a whole world of hurt down the road when the food has to come from somewhere else.
So is the water crisis in California something that can end? Does common ground between environmentalists and agriculture exist? For there to be any kind of resolution to this battle, there has to be a footing that both sides can agree on. what is it? On its current course, without expansion of the water systems in California, it's very likely that smaller family farms that make up a large amount of producers in the San Joaquin Valley will continue to disappear. Unable to keep up with the mountain of regulations and diminishing water allocations, farms that have been in families for generations will continue to give way to larger corporate operations. For municipal and industrial water users, the status quo will continue to see water rates increase while the amount of water actually delivered shrinks. California's population is on track to surpass 50 million people by 2025. But the state's dams, reservoirs, and canal systems are only designed to service a population half that size. Something has to give. If projections on climate change are accurate, California will see longer, more intense drought cycles with higher snowpack levels in the future, putting even more pressure on the people that grow the nation's food supply. But if we can figure out a way to bring balance back to the ratio and accountability of water use in the environment and agriculture, there is room and time for both to flourish.
You know, I think that the future of California water really is about a future of a portfolio effect. It's taking the lessons of Enron, that you don't want to have all of your eggs in one basket. You want to have a diversified portfolio of supplies. And one of the great things for many parts of California is that we've already been doing this for decades. Since that last 87 to 92 drought, we've seen massive increases in water use efficiency. We've seen the beginnings of a revolution in wastewater recycling that's only going to accelerate over time. We're seeing new opportunities to manage groundwater. I mean, we can't really understate just how critical it was that California finally joined the 19th, 20th century idea of managing groundwater.
Water, you need water to have a society. And if you don't have water, you don't have a society. And we're pushing this thing. We're pushing the envelope on this thing. And what happens, and some people will go, pshaw, we'll be fine, we'll be fine. But some of those other places said probably something similar, we'll be fine. And then after the second decade of not being fine, then maybe you just leave.
Farmers face an incredible challenge today. For the first time in human history, they have to morally justify what it is they do, providing food and fiber and energy for the rest of the world, for their communities and the rest of the world.
For me, I pinch myself when I get up and I go to work, and it's like every morning the tractors are starting, everybody, all these family farms are getting ready, and we're going about feeding America, you know, and it gives me goosebumps talking about it. I'm serious, because it's pretty cool being part of that and knowing that you're just one small piece in it, but you are part of it.
Oftentimes when I listen to people talk about wildlife habitat, it becomes clear to me that what is in their head is a forest or an undisturbed ecosystem of some sort. Now, when I think about wildlife habitat, I think about forests and other undisturbed systems, but I also think about agricultural fields. And I don't see that agricultural fields and habitat are two different things. And I think in our future, more and more, we're going to recognize that a lot of these things that we've thought about as being separate actually aren't. And so I think that's one of the exciting opportunities moving forward, is trying to look for the places that we can find shared ground and then manage around that shared interest.
People are going to get water before farming. Cities, if it really gets down to it, the votes and the people are going to get the water. I was in D.C. testifying for a congressional committee years ago, and they were talking about the CVP-IA, Central Valley Project Improvement Act, Miller and Bradley, that were pushing it, okay? When I left DC, I got on a plane, and Miller got on the plane with me. He was in first class, I was not in first class. When we got off the plane in San Francisco, I caught up with him in the airport. and asking, you know, what's going to happen to all the farmers when they take all the water for the environment and all of that. You know, the program was going to cut into our water supply. He said, it doesn't make any difference. We'll get our food offshore. We'll get our food from South America. We'll get our food from wherever. California farmers are a dying breed. That's what he told me.
Production funding for this program has been provided by the Myers Farms Family Trust, bringing awareness to the consumer of the responsible agricultural practices performed by farmers in the fertile fields of the San Joaquin Valley, preserving the world's food supply and natural habitats for the generations yet to come. We are proud to support quality educational programs like Tapped Out and Valley's Gold, only available on Valley PBS.